Every Tuesday morning for 9 straight years, a white refrigerated van from Harlow and Birch Fine Catering pulled up behind the same small bakery on the edge of Winnipeg's North End, unloaded whatever had gone wrong that week, and drove away without a word. Damaged wedding cakes that couldn't be delivered, dessert towers that had shifted in transit, hundreds of pastries flagged as presentation failures, by someone in a head office that had never once smelled flour in the morning. No phone call ahead, no explanation attached, just a handwritten work order, a pickup deadline, and another stack of problems that nobody else wanted to deal with. The woman who ran Harlow and Birch had built her company from a single catering truck into one of Winnipeg's most recognized event catering brands. Her name was Sylvia Harlow Birch, 51 years old, sharp-featured, the kind of person who ran meetings standing up because sitting felt like wasting time. She had a reputation for precision and an even stronger reputation for never repeating herself. If something needed fixing, she expected it fixed before she had to ask. She did not visit suppliers. She did not call vendors. She had people for that, and for 9 years, the bakery at the edge of town had been handled by those people. A line item on a spreadsheet, a reliable outsource contract, something that worked and therefore required no further attention. The man running that bakery was named Roy Dempsey. He was 43 years old, wide through the shoulders, with flour-dusted forearms, and the permanent half squint of someone who'd spent years working under fluorescent lights. At 4 in the morning, his hands were always slightly stiff in the cold, which in Winnipeg meant they were always slightly stiff. He'd had a beard for years now, not because he was attached to it, but because shaving had dropped off the list of things that mattered. The list was short and specific. Get Audrey to school, open the bakery, fill the orders, pick Audrey up, make dinner, check homework, sleep a few hours, do it again. Audrey was 11. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and a laugh that Roy heard far less often than he wanted to. Her mother, Patricia, had died of a brain aneurysm when Audrey was 4. Roy found out on a Tuesday, which was part of why Tuesdays had a particular weight to them even now. He'd been at the bakery at the time. He'd been at the bakery every morning, which was something he'd thought about more times than he could count. The bakery itself was called Dempsey's. No subtitle, no tagline. Just the name, painted in dark green letters above a door that stuck in winter and swung too wide in summer. It sat at the intersection of 2 streets that most of Winnipeg's brunch crowd would never drive down on purpose, between a Vietnamese grocery that opened at 6 a.m. and a shoe repair shop that kept unpredictable hours. The neighborhood was working class in the way that word actually means. Not charming, not up-and-coming, just full of people who had jobs and knew how to wait for things to improve. Roy had inherited the space from his father, who had run it as a diner before the knees gave out. Roy converted it slowly, over the course of a year, that overlapped badly with Patricia's illness. And then with the aftermath of it. He'd been a pastry chef for 8 years before that, trained in Montreal, worked his way through kitchens in Toronto and Calgary before following Patricia back to her hometown. He knew what he was doing, he just did it quietly, in a building most people drove past without looking. Harlow and Birch found him through a purchasing manager, who had heard from someone at a restaurant supply company, that the small bakery in the North End could handle volume without flinching. The contract started as a trial, 6 months of overflow work, then it renewed again. Then 9 years had passed and Roy had never once spoken directly to anyone above the level of delivery driver. That was how it worked. The van arrived. Roy fixed what was broken, restructured collapsed tiers, reglazed surfaces, reconstructed decorations from scratch when necessary, repacked everything with the kind of care that the original production facility apparently could not be bothered to provide. The turnaround was fast, the quality was consistent, nobody complained about the output, nobody acknowledged it either. He had a small team, 2 bakers who came in at 3:30 a.m., a counter person who handled the retail side of the shop, and a part-time decorator who came in on Thursdays and Saturdays. They knew about the Harlow and Birch work, they treated it like weather. A recurring condition you didn't question, just prepared for. Audrey sometimes did her homework at the corner table near the front window after school, surrounded by the smell of cardamom and brown butter, doing long division while her father iced cakes behind the glass. She'd been coming to the shop since she was small enough to sleep in a laundry basket lined with dish towels. She knew the names of all the tools. She could identify pastry cream by smell. She had strong opinions about croissant lamination that she had not been asked to develop, but held with complete confidence. Roy built their life around the bakery the same way he built everything. Methodically, without drama, with a very clear sense of what was load-bearing and what wasn't. He did not date, he did not travel, he did not spend money on things that didn't directly support the two of them or the shop. He put a little aside every month in an account he didn't look at often, because looking at it made him anxious, and anxiety was not a useful ingredient in anything he made. The Harlow and Birch contract was not glamorous. It paid reliably, which in Roy's hierarchy of priorities sat somewhere just below Audrey's health and just above everything else. He cashed the invoices, he filed the paperwork. He never pushed for a rate increase, never complained about unreasonable turnaround times, never flagged the Tuesday morning deliveries that arrived with zero context, and expected results by Thursday afternoon. If anyone at Harlow and Birch had ever thought to ask why their overflow work was so consistently recovered, so professionally repaired, that clients never knew the difference, nobody had passed that question along to Roy. Before we go any further, if you've ever felt like the work you do quietly, reliably, without recognition, is somehow less visible than the work done by people who talk louder, this story is for you. Please take a second to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to Integrity Tales for more stories about the people who carry more than anyone realizes. The collapse of Harlow and Birch did not happen suddenly, although it looked that way from the outside. The cracks had been forming for 2 years before anyone in the company admitted they were structural. Sylvia had expanded aggressively. A second production kitchen in Saskatoon, a third in Thunder Bay, a corporate catering division aimed at the oil and gas sector, a dessert line sold through hotel minibars across Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Each expansion made sense individually. Together, they spread the company's quality control so thin that what had once been a point of pride became a liability. The problems came in stages: a contamination scare at the Saskatoon facility, a high-profile wedding in Regina where 3 tiers of the cake arrived damaged and the backup plan failed, a corporate client who discovered their house-made pâtisses fours had been produced at a facility 2 provinces away and shipped frozen. None of these individually would have sunk the company. Together, stacked inside 8 months, they created a story. And once catering clients started telling that story to each other over their own events, the contracts began to slow. Sylvia handled the first wave of bad press the way she handled most problems, by delegating, optimizing, and refusing to name the crisis out loud. She hired a communications consultant, she revamped the packaging, she let go of the Thunder Bay kitchen and called it a strategic realignment. She did not slow down. The second wave was worse. A food blogger with 200,000 followers attended a corporate gala, catered by Harlow and Birch, and posted a photograph of a dessert display that had clearly been intended to look elegant, and instead looked like something that had survived a car trip in August. The post was specific and funny, and got shared widely, which is the worst combination of things a negative review can be. The inquiry that followed, internal, at first, then increasingly uncomfortable, eventually surfaced a pattern that Sylvia had not been tracking. A significant portion of the company's most consistent client satisfaction scores, across the past 9 years, were tied to events where the desserts had been partially or entirely reworked by an outside contractor. A contractor whose invoice code appeared on hundreds of work orders. A contractor nobody in current senior management had ever met. Dempsey's Bakery, Winnipeg, Manitoba. Sylvia stared at the report for a long time. She did the math herself, which was not something she usually did. 9 years of invoices, 3 to 6 deliveries a month on average. Recovery work that her own quality control team had apparently accepted and passed without noting the source. Hundreds of events, thousands of individual pieces, a decade of reputation quietly underwritten by a man she had never spoken to. She did not immediately feel grateful. Her first reaction was something closer to vertigo. The specific discomfort of discovering that a pillar you assumed was decorative has actually been holding up the ceiling. Her second reaction was more urgent, because the current crisis had a deadline attached to it. Harlow and Birch had contracted to provide desserts for the Manitoba Hospitality Industry Awards, the single most visible catering event on the provincial calendar, attended by every hotel owner, restaurant group, and event planner who might give or withdraw business in the next 5 years. The contract had been signed 8 months ago. The production schedule had been built around the Saskatoon kitchen, which was currently under a voluntary operational review, pending a health authority inspection. The Thunder Bay kitchen was closed. The Winnipeg production kitchen was running at 60% capacity, because 3 senior decorators had left in the past 2 months, and not been replaced. The event was in 11 days. Sylvia made the decision herself, without calling a meeting. She found Roy Dempsey's direct number in the contractor file, a landline for the bakery, and she dialed it herself, at 7:15 on a Wednesday morning. Roy answered on the second ring. He always answered quickly. The phone sat on the counter next to the espresso machine, and he was always near the espresso machine by 7. Dempsey's Mr. Dempsey, my name is Sylvia Harlow Birch, I own Harlow and Birch. There was a brief pause, not stunned exactly, just the pause of a person recalibrating. I know who you are, Roy said. I'd like to come by the bakery this morning if you're available. I want to discuss a project. Another pause. Roy looked through the front window at the street outside, where the morning light was doing its flat February thing across the snow. He looked at Audrey's empty chair in the corner. She was at school. He looked at the rack of croissants his team had pulled from the oven 40 minutes ago, cooling in their perfect rows. I'm available, he said. She arrived at 9:30 in a black Audi that looked briefly out of place between the Vietnamese groceries delivery van and a city bus. Then quickly looked like a car that had simply decided to be there and expected everything else to adjust. Sylvia Harlow Birch was exactly as Roy had expected from her reputation. Composed, direct-eyed, dressed in a way that said she had considered her appearance that morning and then stopped thinking about it. She shook his hand without preamble. She stood in the middle of the bakery and looked around with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. The production kitchen, visible through the open doorway. The small retail counter, the chalkboard menu, the framed photograph above the register, Roy and Audrey at Riding Mountain National Park, summer 3 years ago, Audrey holding a fish she'd caught, and Roy looking at her with the expression of a man who cannot believe his luck. 9 years, Sylvia said. She was not apologizing, exactly, but she said it the way people say things they've been carrying for a morning. 9 years, Roy confirmed. She laid out the situation plainly, awards event, the capacity problem, what she needed and when. She did not dress it up and she did not minimize it. Roy listened the way he always listened, with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that most problems tell you what they need, if you stay quiet long enough. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. How many individual pieces? He asked. She told him. He did the arithmetic in his head, which she could see him doing, not performing it, actually doing it, running through the math of oven capacity and staff hours and ingredient sourcing and realistic turnaround. He asked 2 more questions. She answered them directly. I need to see the design files, he said, and I need to know which elements are fixed and which ones I have room to adjust. The presentation format is flexible, the quantity is not, and the client-facing branding needs to stay consistent. Roy nodded slowly. I'll need to bring in 1 additional decorator. I have someone in mind, that's fine, and the rate I invoice at hasn't changed in 4 years. Sylvia looked at him steadily. I'll pay you current market rate, retroactive to last year's renewal, plus a 20% uplift for the short timeline. Roy was quiet again, not negotiating, just absorbing. Why didn't anyone from your company ever come here? He asked. Not with accusation. Just genuine curiosity, the way you ask about something you've wondered about for a long time. Sylvia considered the question as honestly as it deserved, because the work kept getting done, she said, and I learned to stop questioning things that worked. It was, Roy thought, one of the most straightforward admissions of a management failure he had ever heard. He respected her for not softening it. Okay, he said, I'll take the project. Now, before we get to what happened next, do you think the people who quietly hold things together are usually the last to be recognized? Leave your answer in the comments. Every response helps this story reach more people who need to hear it. What followed was 11 days that Roy would later describe to no one in particular as the clearest stretch of work he'd had in years. Not because it was easy, it wasn't. It was the kind of sustained effort that requires every hour to be planned, and most of them to be used completely. But clarity has a way of making hard things feel clean, and Roy had a clear objective, sufficient skill, and a deadline that left no room for second guessing. He called his additional decorator that same Wednesday afternoon. Her name was Bridget Morrow. She ran a cake studio out of her home in St. Vital, did contract work for 3 other bakeries in the city, and had a reputation for sugar work that other decorators described as either extraordinary or showing off, depending on their own skill level. Roy had called her twice before in emergencies. She said yes both times. She said yes this time in about 12 seconds. The design files arrived from Harlow and Birch by Thursday. Roy went through them that evening at the kitchen table. Audrey doing a social studies project beside him, occasionally leaning over to look at the elaborate dessert specifications with the critical eye she had apparently been cultivating, without anyone asking her to. "That chocolate tier is too tall for those supports," Audrey said, pointing at a structural diagram. "I know," Roy said. "You're going to change it?" "I'm going to fix it so it doesn't collapse in transit." Audrey nodded seriously, as though this confirmed something she had suspected about professional catering. She went back to her project. Roy made notes in the margin of the printed file, with a pencil he kept tucked behind his ear. He sent Sylvia a revised structural proposal by 9 o'clock that night. She replied at 9:45, approved. The production started Friday. Roy's team, reinforced by Bridget, worked in extended shifts that Roy structured carefully, not because he didn't trust his people to manage themselves, but because he had learned over years that tired decorators make errors that double the time needed, and doubling the time was not an option. He built in rest breaks. He staged the production so that each component could be completed cleanly before the next began. He tasted everything himself before it moved to the finishing stage. Sylvia came by on Sunday. She had not said she would. She arrived at 2 in the afternoon on a day when Roy had thought he'd have the shop to himself, and instead found her standing at the glass, watching Bridget work on a series of spun sugar arrangements that caught the light like pale amber. "You could have called ahead," Roy said, though not unkindly. "I didn't want you to stop and explain things," Sylvia said. "I wanted to see it." She stayed for 2 hours. She asked a few questions, practical ones, about ingredient sourcing and storage temperatures and transit packaging. At one point, she picked up a small offcut of chocolate that Roy had trimmed from a plaque and ate it without asking, then looked slightly embarrassed. "That's good," she said. "It should be," Roy said. "It's Valrhona." She walked around the production kitchen slowly. She watched Roy work on a pastry cream filling with the particular focus he brought to things that required temperature precision. Not dramatic focus, quiet focus, the kind that doesn't announce itself. She watched Bridget place a curved sugar shard onto a finished piece with a steadiness that was almost surgical. At one point she paused near the doorway where a child's drawing was taped to the wall. A bakery scene, done in marker, with a tall figure in an apron and a small figure beside him with exaggeratedly large hands. Roy had not mentioned it. Sylvia looked at it for a moment without saying anything. Before she left, she asked Roy a question that she had clearly been holding for a few days. "Do you ever think about working at a larger scale, consulting, or a partnership arrangement? Not necessarily with us, just, in general." Roy was washing his hands at the sink. He considered the question without turning around. "I think about what Audrey's school schedule looks like next year," he said. "I think about whether my morning baker is going to stay or move to that hotel kitchen that's been calling him. I think about whether the walk-in compressor is going to make it through another summer." He turned off the tap and reached for a towel. "Scale is someone else's project." Sylvia was quiet for a moment. "That's not a no," she observed. "It's not a no," Roy agreed. She left without making any specific proposal, which Roy noticed and did not mind. She struck him as someone who thought before she spoke, which was rarer than it should have been in his experience. The delivery to the awards venue went on Tuesday morning, a Tuesday, which Roy acknowledged silently to himself. 3 vehicles, a refrigerated van borrowed from a catering supply company. Bridget in her own car. Roy driving his battered Dodge pickup with the back seat folded down and 6 of the most structurally critical pieces cushioned like museum artifacts. The setup took 4 hours. The venue's event coordinator, a tall man named Gregory, who had the anxious energy of someone who had survived too many catering disasters, walked through the display with Roy at the end, and said almost nothing for a long minute. "This is not what I was expecting," Gregory finally said. "Good, not what you were expecting, or bad?" Gregory looked at him. "The last 3 things I was told to expect from Harlow and Birch were not good. This is very, very good." Roy drove home in time to pick Audrey up from school. She climbed into the truck and immediately asked how it went, because she had been tracking the project with the focused interest of someone who understood the stakes, even if she hadn't been told all of them. "It went fine," Roy said. "Did it actually go fine, or are you just saying that?" "It went fine," Roy repeated. And then, because she would know the difference. "Better than fine." Audrey looked satisfied. She put her backpack on the floor and looked out the window at the February streets of Winnipeg going past. "Can we have soup for dinner?" she asked. "Already started," Roy said. The Manitoba Hospitality Industry Awards event ran the following Thursday evening. Roy was not there. He was at home, helping Audrey with a book report on a novel about a girl who trained sled dogs in the Yukon, which Audrey had opinions about that she was struggling to articulate in the 5-paragraph format her teacher required. They ate soup. They argued gently about thesis statements. Audrey went to bed at 9:30. Roy cleaned up the kitchen, set the prep list for the next morning, and went to bed himself at 10:45. He found out how the evening went the next morning, when Sylvia called him at 8. The display was the most commented on element of the evening, she said. 3 event planners asked the venue coordinator for the name of who did the desserts. "Gregory gave them mine. I'm going to give them yours as well." Roy was standing at the espresso machine. "Okay," he said. "I'd like to have a proper conversation," Sylvia said. "Not about a project, about an arrangement. A real one, with a contract that reflects what you actually contribute." Roy was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a city bus went by. A man walking a large dog paused to let it sniff the base of a light post. The Vietnamese grocery next door was taking a delivery, the owners moving boxes with the efficient rhythm of people who had done it 10,000 times. "I have some conditions," Roy said. "I assumed you would. Audrey is non-negotiable. School schedule, parent-teacher nights, sick days, the bakery stays open. I don't relocate. I won't travel more than once a month, and I choose when. All of that is workable. The work I do is credited properly. Not outsourced to contractor properly, actually credited." A pause on Sylvia's end. "That's fair, and the rate conversation is about value, not relationship." "I'm not discounting because we know each other now." "Agreed." Roy looked through the front window at the green letters above the door, visible in reverse from inside. Dempsey's. His father had painted those letters. Roy had repainted them twice since then, matching the original color exactly from a chip he'd saved in a kitchen drawer. "Okay," he said, "let's have the conversation." He poured his espresso and drank it standing up, which was the only way he ever drank it. His phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Audrey, sent from school just now. "Did the work thing go okay?" He typed back, "Yeah, pretty okay." She sent back a small drawing made out of punctuation marks that he couldn't entirely decode but understood to mean something positive. The partnership that developed over the following months was not dramatic, in the way that stories often require dramatic things to be. It was an arrangement between 2 professionals who had both learned, through different kinds of difficulty, to respect the difference between what looks solid and what actually is. Sylvia began to understand, properly, not theoretically, that the quality she had built her brand on had been partly borrowed from a small bakery she had never visited, sustained by a man she had never thanked. Roy began to see that certain kinds of growth didn't require him to become someone different, only more visible. The Tuesday van still came, but now there was a phone call before it arrived. Now there were conversations about the work, about timelines, about what was fixable and what wasn't. Bridget came on as a regular contractor. One of Roy's bakers got a raise he had been owed for a while. The walk-in compressor was replaced in April, with one that Roy was not constantly listening to, for signs of failure. Audrey, for the record, thought her father deserved more money, and said so, directly when Roy explained the arrangement to her in terms appropriate for an 11-year-old, who had strong opinions about most things. Roy told her the money was better now. Audrey said it should have been better before. Roy agreed with her. He usually did, when she was right. There's a particular kind of person in every industry who keeps things running without making noise about it. They solve problems before the problems become visible. They absorb the overflow. They maintain quality that gets credited to someone else. They do this not because they don't understand their own value, but because the immediate priority is always the work in front of them, and the work in front of them is always more pressing than the conversation about recognition. Roy Dempsey was that person for 9 years. He didn't do it out of passivity. He did it out of discipline, and necessity, and a very clear understanding of what he was responsible for. He was responsible for Audrey. He was responsible for the bread in the oven, and the cream in the bowl, and the delivery that had to leave by 6 a.m. or someone's wedding morning would start wrong. He was responsible for the small green sign above the door, and the 2 bakers who showed up at 3:30, because they trusted him to run a place worth showing up for. He was not waiting to be discovered, he was working. The discovery was someone else's job. It just took 9 years for that someone to do it. If this story reminded you of someone, a colleague, a parent, a person in your own life, who carries more than anyone acknowledges, please share it with them. And if it reminded you of yourself, leave a comment. Where are you watching from, and what are you quietly holding together right now? Subscribe to Integrity Tales for more stories about the people who keep things standing long before anyone thinks to look at the foundation.